Last session, we talked about whether we could trust the Bible. Okay, I hope that at the end of that, we concluded, yes, it is very trustworthy. This is one where, as I said in the last session, I wrote my book, What Do They Believe? And the purpose of writing that, it's this book, this blue one here. When I wrote it, my plan was just to basically teach what is it that people actually believe in these different religions. So you have Mormonism, Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, what else? I forgot one of them. Muslim, Islam, Jehovah's Witness. Okay, that's the one. Yeah. So as we look at those different ones, you know, I got frustrated when I would see books. Or people. There's a rabbi named Tovia Singer, and he's in Jewish circles. They look at him as like, I mean, I actually had a rabbi tell me that Tovia Singer knows the New Testament as well as he knows the what we would call the Old Testament, okay, the Tanakh. And he's like, so I listened to hours and hours of this guy on tape, and I went, this guy doesn't know the New Testament. He's confusing Mormonism and Catholicism and putting them together and saying that's what Christians believe. And so I had determined I wanted to make sure that when I represent what someone else believes, I'm not going to misrepresent them. And so I had studied Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses for many years. And for those who weren't here in the first session, I grew up Jewish, so I didn't grow up knowing Christianity. I knew nothing of Christianity. I wanted to know nothing of Christianity. But when I became a Christian, I started to deal with people that were of other cults, Christian cults, which would be Mormonism, I'd put in there, Jehovah's Witnesses I'd put in there, and Roman Catholicism I would put in there. And yes, I can make a case that I believe the Roman Catholicism is a Christian cult. But I didn't want to misrepresent, and so I studied to see what it is they believed. After 9/11, I was asked if I could help the church understand what Islam actually believes, not what media and everyone else was saying they believe. My pastor asked if I would do that research, knowing the way I study. And so I started to study Islam, taking the Quran, reading through it several times, systematizing it, putting something together, going to imams and saying, is this accurate? Then they said, hey, would you do that with Judaism? Because that's your background. Okay, I said that would take me a little bit longer because the Quran is about the size of the New Testament, and the Talmud is, well, several volumes. Fills an entire shelf. And so it took a lot longer. But I ended up doing that with each of these religions, never expecting that my book, What Do They Believe, people would give as an evangelistic tool. But it's not really an evangelistic tool. There is a guy in the Middle East, I'm not allowed to say where, and I'm not allowed to give his real name. I accidentally, in the early thing, I actually had his real name with the quote, and he goes, you can't use that, because he goes under an alias in the Middle East because he's there as a missionary. And so he does all his work under a different name, and so I didn't want to get him in trouble. But I think you could actually read, I don't know if the quote is on the back or it was in here somewhere, I think. Anyway, it might just have been on the website, but he found it as a great evangelistic tool because he used it, the workbook that goes along with it. He'd work with Muslims and he'd start on the chapter of Islam. And he'd go through Islam and they were like, oh, that's accurate to what we believe. Then he'd go, okay, let's study Judaism. And so just studying world religion. And he would go through that and do each of the religions, and they felt it was safe because he starts on Islam and sees that it's accurate to what they believe. But then he can go through these different religions and they'll study it because it's like, hey, we're just studying world religions. It's not an attack on Islam. And then he would get to Christianity. and it would allow him to talk about what makes Christianity different than each of these other religions. Okay? And so when I did the second edition, the thing that I ended up doing is we included this epilogue. And this epilogue is from basically this talk that I give on the uniqueness of Christianity. The reality is, let me ask it this way, how many religions do you guys think there are in the world? Give me a number. Doesn't have to be exact. You probably won't be wrong, so.
But
What do you think?
I think
What? Is it in the dozens, the hundreds, the thousands, the tens of thousands? What do you think?
the
Hundreds? Thousands? Yeah?
Several like major world religions. But
Yeah.
maybe more.
Okay. So in this talk, I am going to make the argument there's only two religions in the entire world. Only two. Divine and man-made.
That's good argument.
So now the only thing we have to do is say, is there a way we can objectively, not subjectively, objectively, examine all these religions to say which category is it in? That would be helpful, wouldn't it? I'm glad you asked. Let's do that. Okay? Because I think there is an objective way that we can examine every world religion to see whether it is divine or man-made. There's going to be three things that we're going to look at that makes Christianity unique from every single religion in the world. And one aspect of it that definitively defines whether it is man-made or divine. And now if we could do this objectively, if we have these sets of rules, well, guess what? We could take every single one of them and compare. Now I want to start with the fact of asking the question, is there anything unique about Joseph Smith to Mormonism or to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? In other words, is Joseph Smith the only one that could ever have been the one to bring about what we know as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Or could God have used anyone? God could have used anyone. There's nothing unique about Joseph Smith. Okay. What about Islam? Is there anything unique about Muhammad? I mean, is there something supernatural about, like, you cannot have Islam without Muhammad? No. Muhammad would be just another prophet. In fact, in Islam, Muhammad is a prophet who doesn't do anywhere near the miracles Jesus did. He's supposed to be the last and greatest prophet, and yet in the Quran, it's Jesus who does all the miracles, has a miraculous birth, miraculous death. By the way, if you don't know, the reason I say a miraculous death, in Islam, Jesus didn't go to the cross. That was a look-alike that God, here's the thing, God sent a look-alike because in their belief, a prophet couldn't die in a way that would be accursed. So God sent a look-alike. Some say that was Judas, but it was someone to look like Jesus to go to the cross instead. Now think about that. This is the question I ask Muslims. So you believe in a God who deceives his own followers, and you trust him. He didn't put Jesus on the cross to deceive the unbelievers. He put Jesus on the cross to deceive the believers. You want to trust that? And then you look at that, and it says in the Quran that Allah is the great deceiver. Well, they'll be quick to say, no, that word can mean planner. And it can, but in the context, it's a deceiver. And we see him doing that. So, is there anything specific about Muhammad? No. Mary Baker Eddy? Nope. Buddha? Nope. You see, when you look at the different world religions, the one thing that they all have in common except Christianity is that they are based not on a specific person, because anyone could have brought these teachings that they have. Christianity is unique in that way, in that it is based on a specific person. You cannot have Christianity without Jesus Christ. Not because of the name of it. Because people go, oh yeah, you mean just because the name Christian is after Christ. Well, actually, Christ was not his last name. I don't know if you know that. It's a title. Like you have king or Caesar or emperor or president or Christ. It's his title, not his last name. Properly, we would say he's Jesus the Christ. And so there's something unique about Jesus, though, that makes it different than the other world religions. See, every other world religion has as their founder that they base off of is a human being. Rabbinic Judaism is different than biblical Judaism, so let me define that, because biblical Judaism is based off of God. Rabbinic Judaism, or what some people will call Second Temple Judaism, I'll explain why I call it Rabbinic Judaism. What happened after, if you read the Bible, you know that there's the history where Israel was a bit disobedient. They kept worshiping idols, and so what God ended up doing was he took them and told them that they would spend 70 years in captivity. And as they go into captivity, he would curb them of their idolatry, which he did. And in doing so, what they did was they no longer had a temple. And so what ended up happening, is that they ended up building what we call the rabbinic system. Because you no longer had a temple, everything became about the synagogues. The legalism that we see in the New Testament with Judaism and the Judaism we see today is what I would refer to as Rabbinic Judaism. Because it was founded in the writings of the rabbis, the rise of the synagogue and the rabbinic movement. So they call it Second Temple Judaism because they think it was with the building of the Second Temple that when people returned to Israel that it formed. So that's why they have that. But what you see is the rabbis changed Judaism from what the Bible teaches, which is a grace-based system, to a works-based system that we have today. We'll explain that in a little bit when we get to one of the other points. But when we get to Christianity, Old Testament Judaism is based upon God, okay? But Christianity is based on a person, Jesus the Christ. What makes him different? What makes him unique? Well, the thing that we see is that he is not just truly man, just like all of the other founders, Joseph Smith, Mary Baker Eddy, you can go on to the litany of them. They're all truly human. But Jesus is also truly God. And that's what makes the difference. It's not just that he's man, but he is God who took on humanity. That makes him different. So he is fully man he had grown up. he was hungry. He was birthed by Mary. By the way, here's a little tidbit. When you look at the different religions, Judaism is the only religion where the religion is passed on from mother to child. So when the Nazis were killing the Jews, they asked whether your mother was Jewish, because they understood. Most religions are passed on from the father to the child. Judaism is an exception. Anyone want to guess why that might be? Could it be, we don't know this for sure, but could it be that this was passed on because there was a prophecy that there would be one who would come born of a virgin who never had a human father? Would Jesus have been considered religiously Jewish if he was born of a virgin, never had a human father? Well, only if the religion is passed on through the mother. Interesting. I've never heard a good argument from the rabbis. I've asked that, of how they explain why it is, but they will often argue that God just works. God was trying to show the high view he has for women, opposed to the other false religions in the world. I can agree with that. But the reality is, I say that probably more has to do with a virgin birth. Now, the other thing that you end up seeing with that is that not only that, but it becomes very interesting, because how is sin passed on? According to Romans chapter 5, 12 and following, The sin nature that we have is passed on from father to child. So when mothers, when you're have your kids and they act out, you could turn to your husband and say, "It's your fault," because theologically it is. I would always tell people they would look at my kids, and my kids are a mix of the races, and that just produces good-looking children. So people would look at, "Oh, your kids are so good-looking." I would always say they get their good looks from mom and their sin nature from dad. One look at the kids and look at me, you realize where they got their good looks from, clearly, and then I'm theologically correct as well. Okay? Did Jesus have a sin nature? No. Because it wasn't passed on to him because he didn't have a human father. As God, he would not have a sin nature. And so this is something that is unique within Christianity. Its founder, the one it follows, is God, but not just God who took on the form of a human. So he is truly God and truly man. Now, in my book, I refer to it as fully God and fully man. I have changed from, and if I do an update, I'll be changing that because people get confused. How can you have someone fully man and fully God? If you have a cup that's full, how can you fill it again? So just to avoid that confusion, I now refer to it as truly God and truly man. Jesus had the two natures. People argue, well, that doesn't make sense. I go, thank you. Why? Because the God of the Bible is beyond our ability to understand him. Therefore, if you can't understand God, guess what? Maybe you have the right God. I do this with Muslims all the time. When they'll say, well, how could God die on a cross? How could there be a Trinity? That makes no sense. Whenever I talk to a Muslim, one of the first questions I'll ask them, do you believe that God is greater than our ability to understand him? They say yes. Okay, I just stuff that away. I do that a lot when I do apologetics, is I will ask questions up front, and you do it for over and over for a long period of time. You kind of know the questions that people are going to be coming up with. So I know that there's questions I want to ask before they start getting defensive. Questions they're going to give the right answers to. Because once you get them and they start realizing they're going down, you're going down a spot where they're getting wedged in, they start giving you wrong answers. They start answering to defend their faith rather than the truth. So I like to get the right answers out of the way. So, do you believe that God is greater than our ability to understand? They say yes. I tuck that away for later. One of the ones, if I deal with someone who practices homosexuality, I ask this question. Can I have, according to the Bible, can I have sex with anyone that I lust after? Just because I lust after them, does that justify having sex with them? And they say no. Why? Because later they're going to go, well, I was born this way. But we already established that just because you lust after someone doesn't give you the right to have sex with them. So just because you lust after them doesn't mean that you can do that. You already established that. And they go, well, I didn't mean it that way. Oh, now you want to change what you're, right? So with the Muslims, I'm going to ask them, why? Because when they say it doesn't make sense, I go, but thank you. And then they just look at me puzzled. What are you thanking me for? For admitting that your God is wrong. I never said that. Wait, you just said your God is one you can understand. And the God of the real God is one that we can't comprehend, and you can't comprehend how God could be a Trinity. Thank you. To which they start to try backpedal. Okay? So it's a good technique when you go out and do apologetics to just know the questions that they're going to get stuck on later and ask them up front. Just tuck it away. Sometimes I have friends that what they'll do is they'll actually take notes. I'll do that, especially when I do. I'm really bad with Mormon missionaries because I discovered that they have the same phone in the regions, and it's the missionaries that move. Now that I know that, I actually have in my phone 5 different Mormon missionary phone numbers, and I have it for the areas they're in. And I will try to find out when that missionary started or is leaving their mission. So I put that in the notes so that I know when to call that phone again. And so what do? Well, I just create burner phone numbers. I text them from a phone number. I start asking them questions. Because I know that they're going to record the number once they know, oh, we got to reject this person. So they only know me as Drew, and they know a number. I never give a last name, and I stopped having them meet in my house because my house gets marked, my name gets marked. I was actually once at my landlord's after I moved out, and I was just visiting with my landlord, and Mormon missionaries came, and she used to be involved with the Mormon church when she lived in California. When she moved to New Jersey, she got married. Her husband just was like, enough of this. And so the Mormon missionaries had come, and literally I was there, and they were like, oh, you understand Mormonism. And they thought I was a Mormon missionary, and they're talking to me. And they were like, what's your name? And I said, Andrew. They're like, Andrew what? I said, Rappaport. And the two of them looked at each other and were like, we have to go. We're not supposed to be here. I'm like, what's wrong? We can't be here with you. We can't talk with you. So I have to do tricks like this, right? So I have all their numbers. I create burners. I text them. I say, hey, I have some questions. And it's true. I said I was talking to you. I don't know who it is that's on but I just said I was talking to you. Oh, well, you haven't spoken with me. You were talking to a previous missionary. And I was. So I'll meet in public. I'll change where I meet sometimes, but I'll meet now in public, and so I do things like that. When I do that, I know the general things that are going to come up in those discussions, and I'll ask those up front. Get those out of the way. So it's a good technique to do. One of the things I'll ask, especially with Mormons, is, was Jesus God? Now, I believe Jesus is God today. He always was God. But I want to make sure to see if they were believing that he was God, is God, or will be God. That becomes a difference, right? That's a different nature. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if you have a different nature, you have a different person. Any of you see the movie, was it Courageous? Okay, so I always describe the scene. People haven't seen it, but I don't remember much of the movie. But there's one scene I just always loved and laughed at. So basically, the theme of this is there's this guy who's going to have someone work. His coworker says, "Hey, I got it. You're working on your house. You're going to take a week off and work on the house. I got a great guy. I forget the guy's name in the movie, but I'll just say Eugene because I forget the guy's name. But he's like, I'll send Eugene over. He'll help you out. Now, well, there's this other guy, Eugene, who just lost his job. He went to a construction site. He lost his job. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't know what to do. He's got these bills, and he's just walking down the street, just muttering to himself, oh, what do I do? And here's the guy who's expecting Eugene to show up, and he goes, Eugene! And the guy looks up. You're going to get to work. You want to hire me? Yeah. Isn't that what you're here for? Sure. And they start working. At the end of the week, the one guy goes to have lunch with his partners, and his partner says, hey, I'm sorry that Eugene couldn't make it. He goes, what do you mean couldn't make it? I've been working with him all week. He's like, how are you working with him? He's been in the hospital. He's at my house right now. Wait, what does he look like? Well, he's like 6 foot tall and real thin. No, he's like 5'7" and kind of overweight. Guy goes, well, I don't know who's at your house, but it's not the guy Eugene that I was talking to you about. The guy runs over to his house. Goes, Eugene, what are you doing here? Well, I was walking around. You said you'd give me a job. I was praying for a job. What that illustrates is that though they had the same name, they're two completely different people, right? Two different natures. One's tall, one's short, one's thin, one's heavier weight. Okay? So what you see is when we're speaking about Jesus, we have to get to the root of his nature. If he is truly God, meaning that from eternity past to eternity future, in other words, that forever, because there was no time for God, he is God. That is different than someone who could become God. That's two totally different natures. Okay? So right there, when we speak about the founder being God, being Jesus, we also have to identify the nature. His nature is that he's truly God, truly man. This is unique from any world religion, that they have a religion based upon God-man. And this is going to be very, very important why he has these two natures that we're going to get to in a little bit. But it is the only religion based upon a specific person. See, Mormonism is based more upon the works of, well, we'd like to say Joseph Smith, but really Brigham Young. Okay? And that's not unusual within cults. It's usually not the guy that starts it. It's the follow-up person that really establishes all of the beliefs that they have. Because the first guy is usually a charismatic guy that has teachings that aren't too far off. It's a little bit here, a little bit there. And he's trying to build a following. It's the second guy that already has the following that takes it in the trajectory where it usually ends up going. Okay? And so, but is there anything unique to Joseph Smith? No, anyone could have had that. Any guy that wanted to have more than one wife could have, come up with the belief that, he fancies other women. Right? I mean, there's nothing unique to Joseph Smith. There's nothing unique to Allah or to Muhammad. There's nothing unique with Buddha. But there is something unique with Jesus Christ. How many religious followers are God? Right? This is unique. Now, that just makes it that Christianity is unique. But this isn't the one, we haven't gotten to how we can definitively declare it divine. But there is something that's based on this uniqueness that we're going to get to that does play into it. So I'm going to hold off on that and get to the second thing. So first thing is it's the uniqueness of Christ. Okay? Is the first thing. The second thing that makes Christianity unique is the uniqueness of justice and mercy. I want you to think about this for a moment. Can you have justice and mercy? Now, everyone wants to say yes. In Islam, when they speak of Allah, they will say Allah most merciful. They can't say the word Allah without saying most merciful. And the question I will ask a Muslim is Allah just? They always say yes. I tuck that away. Because later I'm going to ask this question. Can you have justice and mercy together? Or are they mutually exclusive? You see, justice and mercy are mutually exclusive. Let me give an illustration. What's your name again? Dennis. Okay. So this would never happen because, I'd be afraid of this happening. But say I walked up to Dennis and I just slapped him across the face as hard as I could. I wouldn't do that because he'd beat me up. But the law, which would be justice, says that Dennis must slap me as hard as I slapped him. That's the law. Okay. If Dennis slaps me as hard as he can, is that just? Yes. Is that mercy? No. Mercy would say that he doesn't slap me at all. Okay, so Dennis, I'm sure he would choose this because he's a kind fellow. Dennis would not slap me at all. Is that mercy? Yes. Is that just? No. Because the law said he had to slap me as hard as he can. If Dennis just kind of slaps me half-heartedly, is that just? No, because he didn't follow the full weight of the law. Law said he had to slap me as hard as I slapped him. Is it mercy? No, because he slapped me. Right? Mercy would be to let it go. Justice is to pay the full weight. We have a dilemma. Though every single religion in the world will teach that if there is a God, because some will just have a different view of who God is, a multitude of gods, all right? But there must be justice and mercy. But how can you get right with God in a system where you can't have justice and mercy? These are mutually exclusive. Therefore, you can't have them both together. That is a dilemma for every world religion, except one. Why? This goes back to uniqueness of who Christ is. You see, one of the things we have to understand is Jesus Christ being truly God means that he is eternal. So an eternal being can pay an eternal fine. When you and I break God's law, that has a consequence that lasts forever. When does it stop? Forever. Why? That seems so extreme. The reality is, it's who we offend. If I was to threaten Dennis's life, I wouldn't do that either. But let's say I did. Dennis, what do you think? You call the police, what are the police going to do? Tell me to stay away from you, right? You think they'll arrest me? Not nowadays. They'll probably just be like, why are you calling us for this, right? Maybe the first thing they'll do is go, what color is your skin? Do we need to deal with it? No. So the reality is they're not going to do anything, right? Okay. Dennis, what do you think is going to happen if I threaten Joe Biden's life? You think it's going to be different? Suddenly there's a difference, right? They're going to throw me in jail for at least 48 hours because that's how long they can hold me without charge and see if there's anything legitimate to it, right? What makes the difference? Was the threat the same? Yes. The difference was who was offended. Joe Biden, though he doesn't realize this, has a more important position than we do in this country. I mean, his wife has to keep reminding him he's president. I think he forgets every day. But the reality is that in our society, his authority gives him a greater position. He's a man like anyone else. I just hope that when I'm his age, that no one abuses me by making me, go out and show that I can't put two words together. I hope they just take me off stage. Yeah, if I ever get to that point, like, cut my speaking. All right? But the reality is this. He has a greater authority than I do. And so, or a greater authority than Dennis. And therefore, a threat to him has a different consequence. Well, God has an infinite authority because he is not only infinitely holy, infinitely just, but he is the creator of the universe. So he has a right position of authority over all of us. He's a rightful place to have that authority. So when we violate his law, that has a consequence that is far greater than threatening the President of the United States. Okay? And so, when we think about that, because he's infinitely holy and infinitely just, by the way, one that people don't want to think about, infinitely wrathful, he's wrathful because he's just and holy, there's an infinite consequence to it. Well, how do you pay something that takes forever to pay? You can't. So, how do I pay off my second lie when I can't even finish paying for my first lie? You see the dilemma that we're in? And we do way more than just tell one lie. It's not even a little white lie, right? We can't excuse it. In fact, a way to illustrate this, to help people understand how wicked we really are, because we kind of think we're pretty good people because we compare ourselves to other people, okay? But here's the thing. The first and greatest commandment according to God is to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Okay. Can you honestly say, well, let me ask this. How many decisions do you think you make on average every day? A lot, right? I mean, why did I put this shirt on versus another shirt? Did I choose to brush my hair today or not? Some of us don't have that problem. Right? Was I in a rush and decided not to brush my teeth or something? Everything we do is a decision. How many do we make? 10, 20,000 decisions a day? Okay, let's make it easy and just say 10,000. So let's say we do 10,000 decisions a day. How many of those decisions can you honestly say, I made this decision because I want to honor and glorify God. Yikes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say you're really good. I had one person say 1,000. Okay. I would be questioning if for me 100 a day, but okay, you're really good. Let's go with 1,000. 1,000 of those decisions. So we're using the numbers to help us out, right? So that means 9,000 times a day times 364 times a year times however old you are, and you can't even pay the first one off. How good are we? Right? So this is the justice that we're talking about. The justice is every one of those sins must be paid. That's justice. How can we do that? It would take forever. I could never finish paying for my sins. In fact, the only way that I could pay for Dennis's sin would be I would have to be perfect and never sin myself, but it would take me forever to pay for his sins. So I would have to be absolutely perfect to pay for his sin. He gets to go free, but I spend eternity in a lake of fire. Sorry, Dennis, I wouldn't do it for you. I would do it for the beautiful woman sitting behind you who is my bride.
And just that.
Sorry, she has preferential treatment in my life. Right? So the reality is, you could pay for someone else. This is actually a law. I had someone who became a Christian, knew the family, went to church with the family. He was dealing drugs. He got busted. They wanted to set up his drug dealer. He ended up working with the police on a plea bargain to get the guy that they really wanted. He was looking to go into prison. He knew he was going. He got a plea bargain deal, so he thought it would, they said probably only 6 months, but he was doing jail time. Problem is, he discovered that he was going to the same prison with the guy he set up. He wasn't looking at 6 months. He honestly believed he was looking at life in prison. He had gotten saved. He and I would meet weekly and pray together. And so I offered, he refused, but we offered that I would do the jail time. I had to be innocent of the crime. I had to be in the right state of my mind. Well, okay, there might be some dispute there, but the judge wouldn't have known that. And then the judge would have had to accept it, and one other person had to accept it. He would have. He refused. He had the same choice everyone has in salvation. He could have been free from prison, even though he was guilty, and have someone else pay the time for him. Or, as what happened, he said, Andrew, if anything ever happened to you, I would never be able to live with myself. And if I die, then I die. So he went to prison. God's mercy, we prayed. He ended up they put him in a solitary where he was, the way the prison worked, there were only like 7 guys that worked in the kitchen, and they were completely separate from the rest of the population. So the only time he would see that guy was when giving food out. So he's out of prison, now serving well in a church. But you had to have someone who was innocent of the crime to serve. So as we look at what justice is, we have a God who's just. He's got to pay. And the only way someone else could pay is they have to be innocent of the crime. In a right state of mind, it has to be accepted by the judge and by the person who's guilty. But how do we get the mercy? Because we say that God is both just and merciful. So the justice is that every single one of us deserves eternity in the lake of fire because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. How's the mercy come in? Dennis, I'm glad you asked that question. The answer is this, that because Jesus is truly God, he, in his divine nature, can pay an eternal fine. So when he died on that cross, being God, he can pay a fine for not only a person for all of eternity, because his nature is eternal, but he could pay it for more than one person. So his death on the cross could be sufficient for all the sins of all people for all time, because he is eternal. Being truly man who never sinned, he can be a right sacrifice for all of us who have sinned. Now do you see how the uniqueness of Christ works into the uniqueness of justice and mercy? See, you have to have a religion where God pays for the sin, but he has to be human to be a sacrifice. He can only be a substitute for us if he is one of us. I mean, try this. Go to the court and say, Your Honor, I know that I have to go to jail. My poodle will do my jail time for me. It's not going to work. Right? Judge says you have a fine, $70,000. I don't have that. So I go to my dad. Dad, can I borrow can I have $70,000? Sure, here's a check. Does the judge go, oh, nope, can't do that? No. He says, okay, it's paid. Human being can pay it. Human being can pay the jail time. Our poodle can't do the jail time. Okay? So, we see the uniqueness of Christ leads to the second uniqueness that makes Christianity unique from every world religion is the uniqueness of the only religion having a God of justice and mercy. And now we get to the key. Now all of this we can examine. You can examine every single world religion and ask, is it based upon a founder who is teaching a system of teaching that anyone could do, or is it someone unique to the person, to God? Then you can ask whether this is a religion that can resolve the mutual exclusivity of justice and mercy. How do you resolve that? Christianity is the only religion I know of that can resolve these two because the full weight of sin was paid by Jesus on the cross. And he had to be human to be a substitute for us, having never sinned. The only solution that I know of to it. Third thing is what I call the uniqueness of divine works. And this is the key. This again is going to get back to the uniqueness of Christ. It's going to build upon the uniqueness of justice and mercy, but it is this simple thing. You can take every single religion in the world, you can examine them and ask this simple question. How do you get right with God? Okay? Every single man-made religion will have some level of human effort. And so what I usually will do is ask the people this question. Remember, I ask questions up front, tuck them away for later. I'll ask a question. Do human beings break God's law? I mean, do humans lie? Yes. Do all humans tell lies? Yes. You doubt that, just have a child. Show me someone that taught their child to lie to them. I never have seen a parent that teaches the child to lie. They teach them later in life. Don't tell your mother this. Right? But no parent is like, now, honey, listen, when I ask you if you did this, say no, even though it's yes, okay? No one does that. They lie because they're sinners. We all do it. And so I'll establish, do we all tell lies? Yes. Okay. Would that be breaking of the nature of God? Would that be a violation of the nature of God? By the way, what am I rooting morality in? A system of 10 commandments? No. The nature of God. You know why lying is wrong? I don't know if you ever thought about this. God's not a liar. That's why lying is wrong. Our morality is not based on a teaching. We're going to see this. It is based on a nature of God. Okay? This is, again, that uniqueness of Christ. It's his divinity. Why is murder wrong? Because God is not a murderer. Why is coveting wrong? Because God is not covetous. You see, it's not based upon a book or a teaching system. It's based upon the nature of God that makes things wrong. Because God is the definition of what's good. So you have someone that says, as I had a guy in the street tell me, there is no God because there's evil in the world. There is no God because there's evil in the world. I said, well, I don't understand. How can you have evil without God? He was, what? He never thought about that. Because he thought that there's evil. If God is all good, there can't be evil. He says, well, what's evil? I said, I didn't say it exists. You did. If you think evil exists, you please tell me what it is. He's like, no, you tell me what evil is. I said, okay. Evil is the absence of good, and good is defined by the nature of God. How could you have evil without God? If there's evil, you have to have good, and if there's good, you can only define that by God. So the fact that they think evil is a way of saying there is no God, no, actually evil is evidence that there is a God. The fact that you know good from evil, because that's an immaterial thing, not a material thing. So if there is no God, we should just be chemical reactions. Chemical reactions don't produce good and evil. You want proof of it? Take some baking soda, pour some vinegar, have it go brrr, and like if you did this in school where you make a volcano and you do that and it fuzzes all over the place, you know what that produces? A chemical reaction. It's not morally good or evil. So take a soda can, shake it up, open it up. It pops out. Is that morally good or evil? No. It's just a chemical reaction. That's what chemical reactions are. They don't have an immaterial sense of morality to them. So when we look at this area, we end up seeing the uniqueness of divine works is this, that we could take a look at every human religion and they will add human works. So what's the question I want to ask up front with that? This is the question. I will say, do men, we all deserve eternity in a lake of fire, we all deserve justice. Do human beings always praise their own goodness? Yes. If a king goes to battle and he wins a couple of battles but loses the war, what does he write about in the annals and the chronicles of his kingdom? Does he write about the war that he lost? No. History shows us that he will praise his own goodness, and even though he lost the war, he writes about the battles that he won. People always praise their own goodness. And I'll ask them, do people do that? Yes. Is that like a universal thing? People will say yes. Okay. So now I'm not making it subjective. I allow them. Yes, they say it's universal, that people will praise their own goodness. Okay. Here's the thing. When we look at this, and we look at the religions, if you want to take any religion, Rabbinic Judaism, remember I made this distinction between Rabbinic Judaism and Biblical Judaism. They're different. Rabbinic Judaism would say you get right with God by doing Torah, obeying the law. By the way, it's not just 10 commandments. It's 316 commandments. So if you thought 10 was hard, don't worry. Most of you are Gentiles. The Talmud has an answer. They would say there's the Mosaic law, and there's only 6 for you guys. You can't keep those either. I don't know why any Jewish person would say, yes, I want 316 versus the Gentiles that only have 6. Give me the 6. Like, why did I always wondered this is, like, why do the Gentiles, who are not God's chosen people, why do they have it easier? The rabbis would say it's because they don't have the law. We have the law, so we're held to a higher standard. So we're more guilty.
Fuck.
Like, I don't get this. This is why you don't have someone like me, right? Jewish people are trained to debate, okay? We're trained to think logically, to argue logically, and this is the problem. I would debate these things and think this is how I end up thinking, right? So here's the thing. Let's take every religion. Okay, Rabbinic Judaism, doing Torah. Catholicism, well, they would say you're saved by faith. Faith alone? Oh, absolutely not. We'll talk about this on Saturday. Faith plus works. Oh, so faith is not enough. Trusting in what Jesus did on the cross is not enough. We need to add works. By the way, anyone that remembers their algebra, okay, if you have A plus B on one side, then you have to have B minus A on the other. Or so you have to subtract. So if you're saying it's what Jesus did on the cross plus my works, guess what that does? That diminishes the work of Jesus by adding our own works to it, which is really kind of, if you think about it, disingenuous. I mean, just picture people going, Jesus, I know you are infinite God who died on a cross in a human form as a payment of my sin, but look at what I did. I walked an old lady across the street. Yeah, look at me. I mean, like, look at that comparison. It's like, Jesus got to be like, really? You want to compare that to the cross? Right? I mean, things we think are good when we're compared to what Jesus did on the cross, taking the full weight of everyone's sin, the punishment of being sufficient for every human being that ever lived. All the sins. I mean, just our own sins. You could do the math. Say 10,000 minus, 9,000 a day times every day of the year, times however old you are, right? You want to compare the little things you do that you call good compared to what he did? That's pretty disingenuous, right? So the reality is, as we look at that, Islam, one good deed counts for 10 bad. Mormonism, well, you'd have to be temple worthy to get to the highest level. But does Mormonism really have a justice? Well, no. You see, it's just, well, you get to one of these 3 levels of heaven just because you are. Yeah, different levels, you get different degrees of heaven. Very few people. Hell will be lightly populated. But where is the justice for the sins we've done? There isn't. You see? And so what you end up having is it's works-based. Same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses, with Hindus, Buddhists. And I've had a Buddhist that argued, no, that's not the case. Really? I asked him this question. What predicts whether you come back in the next life with a better life? And he goes, well, the things you do in this life. And I just sat there quiet, and people in the audience did exactly what you did. They laughed. The whole audience started laughing, and he looked around like he was clueless. He's a New York University professor. He's got a PhD, and he couldn't figure out what 100 people in the crowd was laughing at. And he was like, what's so funny? I said, you just proved my point. The things you do in this life are called works. You see, you can do that with every religion. Christianity is the only religion, when you look at them, it is the only religion where all the work on how we get right with God is based upon the work God did, nothing of what we do. We cannot add anything to the work of Christ at the cross. It's the only religion in the world where God does all the work and we don't contribute anything. You see, I can examine every religion now and say, is it based off of a person? Is it based, where can you rectify the mutual exclusivity of justice and mercy? Do you have any human effort involved? The reason when people say all religions are the same, they're mostly right. Because every man-made religion, because it is based on human effort, is nothing more than a list of morality. It's a moral code. Things to do and not do. That is why all of these religions Mormonism is not based on Joseph Smith. It is based on a set of teachings. Do this, don't do that. Christianity is the only religion that is not based on a system of you must do this and not that to get right with God. It is what Christ did. Well, why do we have good works? Well, see, we don't do good works that we see in the Bible as to get right with God. The good works that are spoken of for Christians to do in the Bible is after we get right with God. It is the difference between what we call regeneration and sanctification. Regeneration is getting right with God. Once we're right with God, we have a process of sanctification until graduation day, which we call glorification, the day we die. Oh, we're looking forward to that. No more sin in this body of flesh, right? And so as we look at that, we have to make the distinction between regeneration and sanctification, because every Christian cult will look at sanctification, the works in sanctification, and apply it to regeneration. And they mix those up because they have to. But Christianity is not based on a moral code. It's based on a person, Jesus Christ. Why? Because he died on a cross as a payment of our sins, and he said and did, but he raised himself from the dead to vindicate not only that he's God, but that we have forgiveness of sin. That is the beauty of Christianity. It is unique from every religion. And I could objectively look at every single religion and look at these 3 categories and ask the question, is it based on a specific person, God, or is it based on a teaching of morality? Can it rectify and resolve the issue of the exclusivity of God's justice and God's mercy? Is it based upon what God did alone, or do I have to add to it? I will unfortunately ruin, maybe for you, one of your favorite preachers. He was, I think, very good early on, but the Billy Graham said this: God did 99%. It is up to you to do the final 1%. I understand what he's trying to say, just to say, hey, come forward, pray the prayer. But that's not true. God did 100% and we did 0. Because if God did 99 and he's relying on us to do the 1%, then who is the ultimate source of our salvation? We are. We become the source of salvation. And that's not what the Bible teaches. You see, so when you have people that say you have to add anything human, who ultimately is the salvation? It's ultimately based upon us. I can look throughout any religion and say, is it a divine effort or human effort? And they all will say human effort. And that's why they all look the same. They're just a system of morality. And Christianity is unique. And that's why I can say to someone who says, well, all religions are the same. I go, I can mostly agree with you because they're all man-made except one. And then I can explain through this. Okay? So, with that, and by the way, this was a little bit longer than what's in the book, because the book is, I think in my book, the epilogue is only about 3 pages. So, all right? But if you get the book and you get the epilogue, this is something where if you know these 3 points, you can talk to anyone that says, oh, all religions are the same.
Yeah.
Not really. There's a way to objectively examine them. You want to say all religions are the same? How do you get a God that's just and merciful? Because Muslims always say to me, well, God must, he just forgives people. How? Based on what? We don't know. But if you die in a jihad, you automatically go to heaven, right? So we do know that one. Well, yeah, by the way, that's not unique with Islam. The Catholic Church did it first in the Crusades. They let out all the prisoners and said, if you fight in war, you die in the jihad, or in their holy war, you go to heaven. No, they had it too. So what you end up seeing is that the ideas here is that if they say God just does it based on whatever, on a whim, then it's not just. It's got to be a reason that payment's got to be paid, right? All right, so with that, any questions? Otherwise, I start asking you guys questions. So you might want to think of some quickly, just saying.
How did you become a Christian out of Judaism?
Mathematics. So, and I thought everyone becomes a Christian after hearing the gospel the first time. I was wrong. I went in 3.5 hours from believing that Jesus Christ is Hitler's God to being a follower of Christ. The guy who shared the gospel with me basically told me about Christ. I wanted nothing to do with him. As I said, I believed he was Hitler's God. He tries to kill Jewish people. I want nothing to do with him. And what ended up happening was he shared the gospel. I can't remember what he shared, but I literally said to him, Chuck, that's great for you. Glad it works for you, but I'm God's chosen people. I'm in like Flynn. I thought my Judaism got me an instant ticket to heaven. That's what I was taught in the synagogue. And so he turns at the top of his lungs as I'm walking away from him. I was 16 at the time. And he says, what if your mother died so you'd be right here, right now, listening to this message, and you walk away? Your mother would have died in vain. That's not the smartest thing to say. In fact, I was on a trip with a bunch of Jewish kids. There were adults that were the counselors and a bus driver. This is the bus driver. And they were all warned that they should not mention my mother. I still, to this day, don't remember what I've done, but I've heard enough stories. People would make mother jokes or say something about my mother, and I would black out. I have no recollection at all. But I would turn extremely violent. My parents actually thought I would kill someone one day because I had no recollection. I had no control over what I did. And I became extremely violent and couldn't be stopped. So they were warned, don't say anything about his mother. And so I remember as my back is turned to him, I clenched my fists, and something happened right then. I personally believe I must have got saved right there or something, because I clenched my fists, and all of a sudden I relaxed my hands and I turned around. And I said, Chuck, you give me a logical reason to believe and I'll believe. Now, I'm not saying this to boast. I don't want it to seem like I'm boasting. It's just I want you to understand who I was back then. I have 168 IQ, which 160 is considered genius. I've passed the test for Mensa. It's not praise on myself. It's because Chuck never finished the 6th grade. Who I was back then, I looked down upon anybody who I did not think was intelligent. To me, Chuck was a Neanderthal. I know Neanderthals don't actually exist, but I looked down on him. I think it's part of God's sense of humor and irony that he's going to take a guy who is 16 and thinks he's the smartest cat in the room and get a guy that didn't finish the 6th grade to teach him the most important thing he needed to learn. Right? Talk about me having to learn humility. And so now see, God's just taken away my ability to think. So it's as we get older. So, but what ended up happening is Chuck went through the Bible prophecies. So here's the thing that I find so interesting. Here's a guy that didn't finish the 6th grade, but he knew his Bible so well. And as he's doing prophecies, I'm sitting there and saying, okay, this is coincidence. This is self-fulfilling. I'm ignoring self-fulfilling prophecies. I could prophesy that I'm going to leave the building going out that door. Pretty good bet that I'll do it. Maybe I'll prophesy I'm going to go out this window. I can maybe make that happen. Right? Because if I prophesy I'm going to do it, I'm going to make that happen. That's self-fulfilling. Reject those. I was interested in the ones of coincidence. Can you control when you're born? Where you're born? Those are things you can't control. So I'm calculating in my head. I know there's an exact timeline of when Messiah is supposed to have come from Daniel. I know the exact town he's supposed to be born in, Bethlehem. How many people live in Bethlehem? How many people lived in Bethlehem at that time range? Right? You start going through these prophecies and start calculating them. And at one point I just stopped Chuck. I said, Chuck, we are beyond statistical impossibility, which is 10 to the 48th power. And he's like, what does that mean? I said, that means that it's statistically impossible for all of these things to happen by chance.
Yeah.
I said, the New Testament had to have been written by God. I said, what does it teach? So he talks about Christ's death, burial, resurrection. I stopped him. I said, Chuck, stop. Dead people don't rise. They rot. See, I must have been a preacher because I alliterated all the way back then. And so the reality is I tried to explain away the resurrection. I hadn't read Josh McDowell's More Than a Carpenter at that point, but I had every one of the arguments that he makes for the false resurrection, if you're familiar with that book. All the ones went wrong tomb, that the swoon theory, that he didn't really die and he came out, that they stole the body. I had all of them. I have one that today I still believe is original with me. My last argument is, Chuck, maybe the disciples dug a hole underneath the tomb and snuck the body out, and that's why the guards didn't notice. And he looks at me and goes, in 3 days through solid rock? They didn't have heavy equipment back then. And that was the thing. I just shook my head. I put my head in my hands. I was shaking my head. And Chuck's like, what's wrong? I said, well, if Jesus is God, I'm accountable to him. I mean, I knew that I was a sinner. I almost burned my house down twice. Once we put it out with a fire extinguisher, a second time in the fire department. So I got better at my sin. And so the reality was it was clear that I was not a good person. But I didn't think I needed a savior. That was the first I realized I needed a savior. So on the steps of a Dairy Queen in 1984, I asked Christ to forgive me for my sin and turn my life over to him and trusted him and was converted.
But
So that's how I got to be saved.
me,
Yeah.
oh, I
Oh, well,
I did your formula for how, the three things
Yeah.
in sharing with people of whatever other faith they might have. I wondered how you think that might translate, because we all know that a lot of what we're dealing with now is more philosophical in terms of where people are grouped. You know, maybe wokeism or either Marxism or
They're the same.
yeah, they're very closely related, most definitely. But we're dealing with those kinds of issues.
But it's no different.
Generation.
Yeah, but it's no different actually.
Yeah, and that's what I want you to
So
say. And
what is, and I'll deal with this on Saturday as well in the morning, is social justice. What is social justice at its core? It's a different gospel message. Is why it's anathema to the church. It's contradictory to the church. Because social justice is we as human beings will right the wrongs of others. Okay? Why? Because we have a generation of people that tried to deny God. And this is consistent whenever it's tried. When you try to create a culture that denies the existence of God, Russia, China, anywhere, this is what always happens. Because when you deny the existence of God, there's no one to get right with, right? You don't get right with God. But yet you still have this guilt when you break God's law. How do you deal with that, right? What is the purpose for life? God has put within us a knowledge of him, even though some suppress that with unrighteousness, Romans chapter 1, and we'll look at that but later this week. But when we have that, okay, they're fighting that. They're trying to suppress it. Yeah, you ever go in a pool and try and take a ball and try and hold it underwater? And the further down you push it, the harder it is to keep it down, and eventually it just smacks you in the face. You know, or you smack your sister in the face. No, I never would do that. I'm sorry. But that's the suppression. They're trying to suppress it, and it's that the knowledge of God just keeps coming up. Okay, that guilty conscience that they're trying to drink their way out of, work their way out of, use pornography to get. They're doing all these different things to try to get rid of that guilty feeling, other than forgiveness with God. So what does that lead to? It leads to this view of, well, we have to make this planet a better planet. That's a work. Everything in the social justice is them working for their own righteousness. Not a righteousness with God, but their own righteousness. That's works. How do you get justice and mercy in that system? They want to say, well, we have to make right the wrongs of previous generations by you paying for something you never had dealt with. Now, I'll say this Saturday, but just in case you guys aren't here, I am fully on board with reparations in America. Okay? I fully believe that we should have reparations. I believe that every Democrat who supported the slavery, fought to keep the people enslaved, fought against civil rights, and is trying to keep blacks uneducated today so they'll keep voting for them. Every Democrat should have to pay reparations to the blacks. And then those blacks should turn around and pay all the Republicans, the white Republicans, for having fought and given their lives to free the blacks. That would be proper reparations. I know, by the way, how are you going to figure out the reparations of those families of the blacks in Africa that kidnapped, that are the actual ones that kidnapped the people that they sold as slaves? See, people forget that. They think it was the white. It was blacks who were kidnapped. Their slave trade was long before whites came to Africa. It's just the whites wouldn't go inland. Okay? So who did the kidnapping to enslave them? Who enslaved them? It wasn't the whites. The whites just bought and sold them. Right? So yeah. So it's a works-based system.
Yeah, but you would treat it then just as another religion. Those false religions and use those.
Yeah, and with social justice, it's a lot of fun, because I had a black guy I was talking with. He's a very big social justice warrior, and I would just bring up the Holocaust. Which one happened sooner? You know, I mean, we could play the intersectionality, and I'll get to that on Saturday. So your question was?
Yeah, I have a question about justice. And as a disclaimer, I do believe that Jesus is sufficient for my navigation with God. But I don't understand how, because it makes sense to me that the consequence for a crime is transferable. But I don't understand how guilt is, because if I commit a crime, someone can take the penalty of that crime for me willingly. But at the end of the day, I'm still the guilty party.
Correct.
I'm the guilty party, and I'm not getting what I deserve. How is justice served by them taking it?
Yeah, because the penalty was paid. The law says that the penalty has to be paid. That's why I try and do a simple illustration of if I slap Dennis. Law is he's got to slap me back. That's the law. So could the law allow for his wife there to slap me back? Maybe she's stronger than him. You know, she's been working out and he hasn't. So
That's
right?
true. We're talking about just of morality in God's court. Like when we do something wrong, we're guilty of something. So if someone pays my penalty, it doesn't mean that they're guilty of my
No,
sin.
no. See, but it's not an issue of guilt. It's an issue of punishment. It's the punishment that was paid. So we still have guilt, but what relieves the guilt? What relieves our guilt is not the payment, but the forgiveness. That's what with Christianity. This is why we can. You know, when I get up and do open air, sometimes I would start off by saying that, you know, people are enslaved to their guilt. That's why you have people that drink, drugs, sleep around. They're doing it to try to get rid of this guilty feeling that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And the real solution to that guilty feeling is forgiveness for the sins we've done. And we can only be forgiven by the one we've committed the offense against.
Okay.
Right? So we're guilty of it, but we offended God. So when he paid that fine, the payment's made, now he can offer mercy. And that's how we have the forgiveness. Okay. You see why it's so important that Jesus is truly God and truly man now? Because the only way you can resolve the grace and the mercy and the justice, and then we can see why it's based upon what he did and not what we did. Makes it unique. Makes it so we can look at this, and I could objectively look at every single religion and look at that. Lord, we're grateful that you give us your word, something that is an authority that we can look to know how to live for faith and practice. We have your self-revelation of you to us so that we can examine it. And as we just talked about, we can compare it to every single religion in the world and look at what your word says and see whether these religions are true or not. Even those that claim they're from your word, and yet we can compare them and see that they don't align with you. So Lord, we're grateful that you chose to redeem us. We are so undeserving of that, but we are also so grateful. And so we ask, Lord, that we could take what we learned today and use it as we share the gospel with others, that we would be able to communicate and defend the faith so that people would recognize what you may be doing in their life, that people would come to repentance, that, Lord, that you would use us as your vessels on earth to talk about and to do the ministry you have for us to do. It is not about us, and it is all about you, and we're grateful for it. Thank you, Lord. Amen.